Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The small town of Riverside basked in the sweltering heat of summer. Flags fluttered limply in the main square, and the chirping of crickets mingled with children's laughter. In this town where everyone knew everyone else, Sheriff William Carson was the undisputed authority figure. His daughter, Emily Carson, was the complete opposite, lively, impetuous, and convinced that no one knew justice better than she did. That evening, the town was celebrating its traditional harvest festival, and locals thronged around the stalls, enjoying cotton candy and lemonade. Marcus Thompson, an elegant and calm man, observed the crowd from a corner, incognito. Few knew that behind his unassuming appearance, he was the state's chief prosecutor, there to investigate certain cases of corruption and negligence in the region. He wasn't there to be seen, he wanted to witness local justice in action, free from the influence of his title. Emily, perched on the sidewalk to get a better view of the crowd, spotted Marcus near the handcrafted jewelry stand. Suddenly, she pointed. There. He stole it. The words echoed in the warm air. People turned around in surprise. Marcus raised his hands calmly, trying to explain. I think there's been a mistake. I didn't steal anything. But Emily wouldn't listen. The crowd began to murmur, and Sheriff Carson, busy greeting the residents, was alerted by his deputies. Before he could intervene, Marcus was handcuffed and taken to the station. Emily's face lit up with undeserved pride, while Marcus maintained an impassive expression, but his eyes shone with a determined gleam. He knew this moment was only the beginning of a much greater shock. The man she had just wrongly accused was not just a citizen, he held the power to transform the entire system that Riverside thought it knew. And in this small town, where appearances and hasty judgments reigned, the storm had barely begun to rise. The Riverside police station was modest, its walls painted a faded white and its fluorescent lights creating an atmosphere that was both austere and oppressive. Marcus Thompson was led to a cell, his hands still cuffed, but his gaze remained calm and piercing. Emily, still excited by her victory, closely followed the sheriff. She called out. I knew I was right. This man has no business being here. Sheriff William Carson frowned, slightly uneasy. He had only known Marcus for a few minutes, but something about his behavior didn't fit with the man Emily had just accused. Emily, calm down. Let's make sure we have all the evidence before declaring victory. But Emily shook her head stubbornly. Dad, look at him. He doesn't look innocent. He has this suspicious attitude. In the cell, Marcus watched the scene intently. He knew that any haste would be counterproductive. He spoke softly to the deputy who had escorted him. I am Marcus Thompson. I can assure you that you are making a grave mistake. The deputy shrugged, unimpressed. We're just doing our job, sir. The sheriff's daughter says you stole. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. He knew that revealing his identity now would cause a shock, but he had to play the role of the prisoner, buy time, and collect the clues that would allow him to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, in the station lobby, Emily was telling the story to anyone who would listen, exaggerating every detail to impress her colleagues and friends. But a few glances were beginning to turn in her direction with skepticism. The local detective, Tommy Rivers, frowned. Emily, wait, are you sure about what you're saying? Of course I am, she replied, too sure of herself to heed caution. Tommy mentally noted that something was amiss. Marcus showed no signs of guilt, and certain details of the accusation seemed strangely vague. A nascent intuition took hold, he had to investigate this case before an injustice was committed. As night fell on Riverside, the small town seemed to be sleeping peacefully. But behind the doors of the station, an invisible tension hung in the air. Emily's hasty accusation had just set in motion a series of events that would shake the town and its inhabitants to their core. Marcus, sitting on the bench in his cell, smiled slightly to himself. He already knew about this storm. He wouldn't remain the victim of a misunderstanding. The following day, the riverside sun shone with an almost deceptive brilliance. The town seemed calm, but at the police station, the air was thick with tension. Marcus Thompson was still being held, observing every movement with calculated patience. Detective Tommy Rivers, a sharp-eyed man in his 40s, had begun to revisit the events of the previous day. He knew that the crowd could be swept away by hasty accusations, and something about Emily Carson's behavior seemed too impulsive. He questioned several witnesses. "Are you sure about what you saw?" "Yes, I saw him near the stand, but," hesitated an old lady, "he didn't take much, just a watch, I think, but I'm not sure." Tommy mentally noted every detail. Nothing perfectly matched Emily's accusation. The man seemed too calm, too composed to be a thief. Meanwhile, Marcus had begun to speak subtly, planting clues for the truth to emerge. He asked the deputy in charge. "Have you checked the security cameras?" "No, not yet." "Perhaps you should do so. Evidence is always more reliable than hasty accusations." Marcus smiled inwardly. He knew that soon these clues would attract the attention of the sheriff and Tommy. He wanted the injustice not to go unpunished, but he had to act with caution. Sheriff Carson, for his part, was beginning to feel a weight on his conscience. He had always trusted his daughter, but certain details of the case troubled him. He decided to visit Marcus alone. In the sheriff's office, Marcus looked at him calmly. "Sheriff Carson, I understand your loyalty to your daughter, but I assure you, I am innocent." The sheriff, surprised by Marcus's calm and dignity, had a moment of doubt. "Emily, she never lies, but something's not right." That same day, Emily continued to boast to her friends, unaware that her actions could cause irreparable harm. But whispers began to rise. Some residents wondered if the arrested black man was truly guilty. As the day drew to a close, Tommy Rivers gathered his initial evidence, conflicting witness statements, the absence of incriminating videos, and above all, Marcus's impeccable behavior. He realized they were facing an unjust accusation, and that the truth had to come out before the city made an irreversible mistake. In the shadow of Riverside, a silent storm was brewing. Marcus, with his implacable calm, knew that the moment to reveal his true identity was approaching, and that the impact would be monumental. The next morning, the riverside sun shyly illuminated the silent streets. At the police station, the atmosphere was tense. Sheriff William Carson could no longer ignore the unease that had been gnawing at him since the previous day. He had always trusted his daughter Emily, but something about Marcus Thompson's attitude and the conflicting testimonies gave him a disturbing premonition. In his office, the sheriff reviewed the reports that Tommy Rivers had compiled. The inconsistencies were glaring. Security cameras had shown no evidence of theft, and several witnesses were recanting their initial statements. "Emily, something's wrong," the sheriff said in a deep voice to his daughter. "Dad, I'm telling you I saw him take the watch," replied Emily, her voice trembling but determined. "Maybe, but we need to check before we ruin someone's life." Emily shook her head in frustration, but a small seed of doubt had just sprouted in her mind. Meanwhile, in his cell, Marcus was thinking about how to turn the tables. He knew that revealing his identity too soon would have been pointless. The city needed to see the truth for itself, without prejudice. He began leaving subtle clues for the investigators, a reference to his official position, details of legal procedure that only a chief prosecutor would know, and suggestions on how to examine the missing evidence. The astute detective Tommy Rivers noticed these clues. He reasoned that Marcus wasn't lying and that the accusation was based on hasty impressions rather than concrete facts. He shared his observations with the sheriff. "William, something is wrong. This man is nothing like the criminal your daughter describes." "I'm starting to feel it too," replied the sheriff, his face grave. "I need to review all of this myself." Emily, meanwhile, began to feel worried for the first time. She wondered if her anger and impulsiveness had wrongly landed Marcus behind bars. A mixture of shame and fear washed over her. As night fell on Riverside, a silent tension hung over the town. Sheriff Tommy, and even Emily, were beginning to understand that they weren't just playing with a man's reputation, they had come dangerously close to a major injustice. Marcus, for his part, remained impassive in his cell. He knew the moment of revelation was approaching, and that when the truth came out, it would shake the entire town. A storm of revelations was brewing, and no one in Riverside would be ready to face it. The Riverside courthouse was packed that morning. Residents had gathered, curious to see Marcus Thompson's trial. Emily, confident in her role as a champion of justice, sat in the front row, chin raised, ready to see justice prevail. Marcus was brought into the room, calm and dignified, his hands cuffed. His eyes scanned the crowd with quiet intensity, and his face displayed a serenity that no one could ignore. Sheriff William Carson stood beside Emily, sensing the rising tension. Tommy Rivers, meanwhile, watched Marcus's every move intently. As the judge asked Emily to present her evidence, Marcus suddenly stood up and spoke in a clear, firm voice. "I believe it's time the truth came out. I am Marcus Thompson, the state's chief prosecutor. I have never stolen anything, and I was not there to cause harm. Your accusation rests on hasty assumptions and egregious errors." A deathly silence fell over the courtroom. The residents froze in disbelief. Emily paled, unable to utter a word. The sheriff put his hand to his mouth, shocked and humiliated. You're the chief prosecutor," he stammered. "Exactly," Marcus replied calmly. "And I'm here to make sure that justice is properly served." Murmurs filled the room. Emily lowered her eyes, overwhelmed by shame. She realized she had accused an innocent man without proof and that she had almost caused enormous harm to the city. Marcus continues. "This case reveals more than my innocence. It shows that hasty judgments, prejudice, and blind loyalty can lead to injustice. Sheriff Carson, I advise you to review your procedures and consider the consequences of your actions." The sheriff, red with confusion and guilt, lowered his head. He knew he had to make amends, not only to Marcus, but also to his daughter, whom he had to guide so that she would understand the gravity of her actions. That day, Riverside learned an important lesson: truth and justice cannot be compromised by impulsiveness or prejudice. Marcus, with his dignity and composure, had not only proven his innocence but had also exposed the flaws in the local system, reminding everyone that justice requires patience, evidence, and fairness. Emily, humiliated but aware of her mistake, began a long journey of reflection. The sheriff now had to repair the broken trust with the community. And Marcus Thompson, the chief prosecutor, left the room with everyone's silent respect, leaving behind a lesson Riverside would never forget. The days following the revelation were fraught with tension in Riverside. The small town, accustomed to routine and hasty judgments, was now shaken by a mixture of shame and reflection. Emily Carson, the sheriff's daughter, had remained cloistered in her room for several hours after the public humiliation. The pride and impulsiveness that had driven her to accuse Marcus Thompson had given way to a mixture of shame and guilt. She knew she had nearly destroyed an innocent man's life. When her father entered, she could not meet his gaze. "Dad. I was wrong." "Emily," Sheriff Carson replied, his voice deep but gentle, "you acted on impulse and out of loyalty to me, but loyalty should never replace justice. It's time to learn from this mistake." Sheriff Carson then took the initiative to reform certain department procedures: more checks, more hasty assumptions, and above all, training on equality and justice for all, regardless of skin color or social status. Marcus Thompson, as chief prosecutor, quietly oversaw these changes, ensuring that Riverside learned a lasting lesson from the experience. He remained humble and patient, reminding everyone that justice is not a privilege but a duty. The community, initially shocked and divided, gradually began to change. Those who had applauded Emily's hasty arrest came to understand that the truth required patience and discernment. Marcus's example became a symbol of dignity and integrity. As for Emily, she embarked on a long road to redemption. She publicly apologized to Marcus, and the town applauded her courage in admitting her mistake. Sheriff Carson, proud but vigilant, knew that his daughter had just learned a lesson that neither anger nor pride could erase. The small town of Riverside was never quite the same. It had witnessed a potential injustice, but thanks to the courage and patience of an exceptional man, the truth had prevailed. And in that triumph, everyone, from the sheriff to his daughter, to the townspeople, had learned that justice could not be compromised by haste, fear, or prejudice. Marcus Thompson finally left town, leaving behind not only his proven innocence, but also a lesson that Riverside would never forget: justice is not a matter of power or social role, but of truth, patience, and fairness for all.